I heard that it's not your first visit to Poland. Can you tell us more about previous visits and the search for your Polish roots?
Well, in the early 1990s, I came to Poland several times looking for my ancestors that immigrated to Bukovina around the 1780s. One family was Szemeneski, the other family was Shatyński. And although they were Roman Catholics and in the church records in Bukovina, in Kashika, I couldn't find their origins in Poland. I presume they came from the east, from eastern Poland, but I did the search in many of the parish records and I couldn't find the families.
Let's jump to Stray Dog collection. This collection of poems was written quite late in your life. What was the main reason behind writing them?
Well, I was living in the Czech Republic at the time, and I had already published several books about gypsies, about the Romani Holocaust, and I had been interviewing Romani Holocaust survivors for a couple of years. And I wanted to take a break from writing about gypsies and went back to my sporting days when I was an amateur boxer. And I just started to write the odd poem about boxing. And it suddenly grew into a collection. The publisher of my gypsy books asked what I was writing, and I said, well, I was writing some poems about boxing. He asked to see them, got excited about them and decided to publish them. And I didn't write them for publication, I just wrote them to take a break from my gypsy work, but it's proved to be my most successful book. It's been published in 6 or 7 different languages and now in Polish.
When I first read your boxing poetry, I was moved by its directness, and I think the only poet who is as direct as you is Charles Bukowski. Were you influenced by him, and generally, what about writers who have meant a lot to you?
Well, actually, I think I do owe a bit to Bukowski because he liberated me. I was a bit worried that my poetry was too direct, and many people considered it more prose than poetry. And when I read Bukowski, I said, hey, we're on the same page. And since he was so popular and famous, I felt I was on the right track with my poetry.
In the poem Warm Womb of Violence, you say that the pain only comes when you unwrap your hands and you're back to reality, suffering like a normal human being. Do you think that the violence can be a form of escape for boxers, escape from life's struggle?
Well, I wouldn't call it violence because I don't think there's violence per se in the boxing ring. At one of my readings, someone asked me, what's the difference between a concentration camp guard and 2 boxers in the ring? And I said, well, if a prisoner is lucky enough to be released from a concentration camp, you don't see them hugging the guard when they say goodbye. But 2 boxers after a battle do hug each other, and they mean it. And they're truly brothers in what we call the ring. And my boxing poems were not to glorify boxing, but to understand the origins of violence. And I think boxers are not violent. They're in a battle, they're trying to win, but they are still brothers in the boxing ring.
Now here's a lighter question, a boxing question from one of our readers. Can you give us the top 3 of your favorite fighters? And I think one of them will be Ingo Bingo, Ingemar Johansson, and what about these two others from the top 3?
Well, Ingo, I was a young boy listening to his first fight on the radio with Floyd Patterson. It was a big upset, probably one of the biggest upsets in the boxing world up until that time. And since I have some Swedish ancestry, it was, you know, nice to see Ingo come out on top. He was a big underdog. The other fighters I admired were Carmen Basilio. He was an ex-Marine, an onion farmer. He never gave up. He bled more than almost all the other fighters put together, but he had the biggest heart I've ever seen in boxing. I don't know who the third one would be. There are many fighters that I admired, and maybe Sugar Ray Robinson, because I once sparred with him in Madrid when he was about 50 years old and I was only 22. He, for the first minute of our sparring, he put a hanky down on the ring and stepped on it and said, "I won't take my foot off this hanky for the first minute, and I'll bet you dinner you can't hit me." And I thought he was kidding me because I was young, I had fast hands, but for a minute, in fact I think for the first 2 minutes, I couldn't lay a glove on him. He could duck and bob and weave more than any fighter I ever saw.
Nowadays boxing champions fight twice a year and they make millions of dollars, while in the old days it was much harder to be a boxer. And what is your opinion on modern boxing?
Well, it's nothing but show business, entertainment. It's much like professional wrestling. I don't know how much is actually fixed, but I would think, you know, there's a lot of fights out there that are staged so that people will want to see the rematch. I think boxing, like everything now, is big business, big entertainment. It's not like the old days when a lot of it was done for sport. People would fight maybe once a week just to get a paycheck. Those were the days when fighters had a couple of hundred fights. Some of them had up to 400 fights. And it was a real profession back in the olden days.
Setting aside poetry, there are many other things that you have written. And which of your books are you the most proud of?
Well, that's like saying, which of your children do you like best? I think any parent would say that all children are equal in their eyes. You can admire a certain child's talent, you can admire a certain children's behavior, but basically you love all your children the same, just as a writer, I think, likes all his stories, all his poems, all his books the same. So I really couldn't say I have a favorite. The boxing poems have turned out to be probably the bestseller that I've had, but you know, I've written maybe 40 books by now that have been published, and maybe another 20 books that haven't been published because I haven't sent them anywhere. So you know, it's very hard to, I think the first book I ever wrote when I was 21 years old was a novel about boxing. Never was published, and I don't even think I have a copy of the manuscript anymore. But, you know, I just write from experience, and my experiences are what my writing is all about.
Thank you for the first part of the interview. Have a short break now, yeah? Just a short break. You want something to drink, Paul?
No, I'm fine.